Hey, I'm Johnson. I'm 24, born and raised in a small town just outside of Des Moines, Iowa. I've been working as a handyman for a little over a year now. I fix whatever people need, doors, walls, plumbing, you name it. I never went to college, couldn't afford it. My dad was a builder, and when I was a kid, I tag along with him to job sites. He taught me everything. I know I decided to turn it into something real, so I started my own small business. Johnson's Home Repairs. Most of my days are pretty routine. One house to the next, one repair after another. Some days go smooth. Some days I mess something up and learn the hard way. That's life in this business. That morning started like any other. I grabbed my tools, checked my appointments, and saw a new work order pop up on my phone. It was for a lock replacement job, front door, and some interior doors. The address was in one of the nicer parts of town. The pay offered was pretty good too. I didn't think much of it, just another job. I pulled up to this beautiful modern house set back from the road with a perfectly manicured lawn and big oak trees lining the drive. I walked up the stone path to the front porch and rang the bell. The door opened and there she stood. Rebecca. She looked around 40, but honestly I would have guessed early 30s, toned, athletic, flawless skin. Dark hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. Her outfit was simple, fitted black leggings and a white sleeveless blouse, but she wore it like she belonged on the cover of some upscale lifestyle magazine. There was a calm confidence about her that immediately stood out. "You must be Johnson," she smiled warmly. "Thank for coming." "Yes, ma'am, I'm here for the locks." "Call me Rebecca. I'll show you what needs to be done." She walked me through the house. The place was spotless, decorated tastefully in a modern but cozy style. Big windows, neutral tones, expensive furniture without feeling showy. You could tell whoever lived there had money but also had taste. We stopped at the front door. The old deadbolt and handle set were worn and loose. Then she pointed to two interior doors she also wanted changed out. "I had a break-in scare a few weeks ago," she explained as I inspected the hardware. "I've been meaning to upgrade the locks ever since. I just never got around to it." I nodded and got to work. I set down my toolbox and started removing the old locks. I worked in silence, while Rebecca went about her day somewhere in the house. Every now and then, I caught faint traces of soft music or her voice on a phone call in the other room. The job took about 2 hours by the time I tightened the last screw on the final door. I stood back and admired the clean, fresh look of the new brushed nickel hardware, all done. I gathered my tools, wiped my hands, and walked toward the kitchen, where I knew she'd been. She greeted me with a smile. "Everything's set," I said. "You shouldn't have any more problems. Thank you, Johnson. I feel safer already." She walked over to the counter and picked up her purse. As I was about to hand her the receipt, she stopped and looked me straight in the eyes. There was a pause, just long enough to make me notice. "Maybe you should keep a key too," she said casually. I froze. I thought I misheard her. "Sorry," I half laughed, completely caught off guard in case I ever need help again, when I'm not home or even when I am. Her smile was soft but playful. I chuckled nervously, unsure what to say. "If you're sure you trust me like that." Without breaking eye contact, she stepped closer and slipped a single shiny key into the side pocket of my work pants. I stood there stunned. She turned and walked toward the living room like nothing had happened. I packed up, thanked her again, and walked to my truck, feeling more confused than I'd ever felt after a job. As I drove home, the key sat heavy in my pocket. I couldn't stop thinking about it. That had never happened before. I had no clue what it meant or what I was supposed to do with it, but something told me this wasn't over. I couldn't sleep that night. I tossed and turned, staring at the small silver key sitting on my nightstand. I had emptied my pockets when I got home, and there it was, mocking me with a mystery I wasn't prepared for. I kept replaying it in my head, her words, her tone, the way she slipped it into my pocket. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. I'd never had a client do anything remotely close to that. Most people barely even made eye contact after signing the invoice the next morning. I threw the key in a drawer and told myself to forget it. "It's just a rich lady being flirty," I muttered as I poured myself coffee. Not my problem. I tried to get back into my usual routine for the next few days. I kept busy jobs in and out, fixing a leaking faucet, patching drywall, changing out a ceiling fan. Normal stuff, safe stuff. I ignored the key like it wasn't there, but I couldn't get Rebecca out of my mind. There was something about her, the calm way she carried herself, the warmth in her voice, the effortless way she had unsettled me with a single gesture. It was like I had walked into a different world for just a few hours, and now I couldn't find my way back. 2 weeks passed. One Friday afternoon, I sat in my truck in between jobs, staring at my phone. My thumb hovered over her number. I had saved it under Rebecca locks because I didn't know what else to put. I wasn't going to use the key. I decided that early on that would have crossed a line, but the urge to see her again was stronger than my better judgment. I finally texted, "Hi, it's Johnson, just wanted to check if everything's working okay with the locks." The reply came fast, "They're perfect." But I was starting to think you'd never text my stomach. Did a flip. I stared at the screen for a moment, then came the second message. "If you're not too busy, why don't you come by?" I sat there gripping the steering wheel, debating. I could have ignored it. I should have ignored it. But I didn't. I drove back to her neighborhood, the familiar oaks lining the street, the big iron gate opening at the push of her remote. This time, I rang the doorbell. I refused to touch the key. I wasn't going to break that boundary. Rebecca opened the door, wearing jeans and a simple soft gray sweater. Her hair was loose around her shoulders. She gave me the same soft smile that had been haunting my thoughts for days. "I was wondering if you'd ever come back," she teased lightly. I cleared my throat. "I had to know what you meant that day." She stepped aside and motioned me inside the house. Felt even warmer than I remembered. The light was softer. The air smelled faintly of vanilla and cedar. We sat at her big kitchen island. She poured us both a cup of coffee. Conversation came easy. We talked about small things at first, my work, her garden. The weather turning colder. I found myself relaxing. The tension I'd carried for days started to fade. After a while, she tilted her head and studied me. "You really didn't use the key." I shook my head. I couldn't. That wouldn't have been right. Her smile grew wider, more genuine. "That says a lot about you, Johnson." We talked for over an hour. Then she stood up and opened a tall glass cabinet. "Would you rather have wine instead?" she asked. I hesitated only for a second. Sure, the bottle was already open. She poured 2 glasses of deep red wine and handed me one. We moved to the living room, where soft jazz played quietly from hidden speakers. We sat on the big cream-colored couch, angled slightly toward each other. The conversation deepened. She told me about how she'd moved to town 2 years earlier, how she loved restoring old houses, how work kept her busy, but sometimes lonely. I share bits about my life too, how I'd started my own business from nothing, how hard it had been at first, how much I loved the independence, even though it came with pressure. There was a long, comfortable pause after I finished talking. "I like your honesty," Rebecca said quietly, her eyes meeting mine. "You're different." The air shifted. I could feel it. Neither of us moved, but the space between us suddenly felt heavy with unspoken things. I finished my wine and stood up slowly. "I should probably get going." Rebecca didn't argue. She walked me to the door. As I stepped outside onto the front porch, she reached out gently and touched my forearm. "Johnson," I turned back. I meant it. "You know, the offer still stands." I gave her a nervous smile and nodded. I walked back to my truck with my heart racing, feeling like I was standing at the edge of something I didn't fully understand yet. The key still sat in the drawer back home, but I knew this wasn't the end of it. The next few days felt like walking around with static electricity under my skin. Every job I did, replacing a kitchen sink, patching drywall, fixing a warped door frame, felt mechanical, automatic. My mind wasn't there. It kept drifting back to Rebecca. I didn't tell anyone about her. Not my buddy Joel, who I usually shared everything with. Not even my dad, who'd probably give me a lecture about keeping things professional. I knew I should have stayed away. I told myself that every night, but something about her kept pulling me back like gravity. A week passed. I resisted texting. I resisted the urge to drive by her house, but the key never left my drawer, and every time I opened it, I caught myself staring at it for just a second too long. Then late Friday afternoon, my phone buzzed. Her name flashed on the screen. "Rebecca Locks." The message was short. "I'm opening a bottle of wine tonight. No pressure, just company doors open." I sat in my truck for at least 10 minutes staring at that text. I could have deleted it. I could have ignored it. I didn't. I drove over faster than I should have. It was already dusk when I pulled into her driveway. The big windows of her house glowed softly in the fading light. This time I didn't ring the bell. I stood at the front door with the key in my hand. It felt heavier than it should have. My thumb brushed over the edges as I thought, just go home, walk away. I didn't. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The soft scent of vanilla and cedarwood filled the air again. There was low music playing in the background, some mellow blues track that I didn't recognize. Rebecca appeared from around the corner, barefoot, wearing dark leggings and an oversized cream sweater that hung off one shoulder. You used the key. What? She said softly, smiling. There was no judgment in her voice, only warmth. I closed the door quietly behind me. I did. She walked over and handed me a glass of red wine without another word. We sat on the couch again this time, closer than before. We talked. Laughed, told stories about the weirdest clients we'd both had. Hers is a real estate agent. Mine is a handyman. I watched the way she tucked her legs under her body, the way she absent-mindedly twirled the stem of her wine glass as she listened. I don't know when exactly the shift happened, but at some point the conversation slowed. The pauses between words grew longer. Rebecca set her glass down and leaned back against the couch cushion, her gaze soft but focused on me. I've been alone for a long time, Johnson, she said, and I don't usually invite people in. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I didn't move. I didn't know what to say. I know this probably feels complicated for you, Fona, she continued quietly, but I like having you here. I swallowed hard. I shouldn't have come, but you did, she whispered, reaching over to gently rest her fingers on my arm. Her touch was light, but enough to freeze me in place. The moment hung there. The space between us felt paper thin. I could have gotten up, said goodnight, left like a gentleman. I didn't. I stayed. The rest of the night blurred into soft laughter, whispered confessions, long silences, filled only by the crackling of the fireplace. I woke up the next morning in her bed, sunlight pouring in through the sheer curtains. My clothes were folded neatly on the chair. Rebecca lay beside me, still asleep, her hair spread across the pillow. For a long moment I just stared at the ceiling, feeling equal parts exhilarated and terrified. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her, got dressed and left quietly as I drove home. The reality of what had happened finally started to settle in. I had crossed a line. I never thought I would. I had no idea where this was going or what it meant. All I knew was I couldn't undo it. Now the days that followed felt like I was balancing two completely different lives in one. I was still Johnson, the handyman, the dependable guy who fixed people's leaky pipes, crooked doors and cracked walls. My day started early with a thermos of bad gas station coffee and a scribbled list of addresses in the passenger seat of my old Ford truck. I drove all over town, small houses, big houses, apartments, shops. I shook hands, gave estimates, offered polite smiles, and stayed professional. But in the second life, the one that waited for me after the workday ended, I wasn't just Johnson, the handyman. I was something else, something I didn't even know how to define. At first, I tried to pretend nothing had happened. I told myself it had just been one night, a mistake I wouldn't repeat. I buried myself in work. I installed ceiling fans, replaced cracked window panes, fixed a wobbly porch swing, resealed a bathroom tile. I tried to lose myself in the simplicity of routine, but Rebecca kept creeping back into my thoughts like sunlight through a closed curtain. Every evening, I would look at my phone, my thumb hovering over her name, and my contacts test locks. Sometimes I just stared at it for long minutes, arguing with myself before finally setting the phone down. I lasted 4 days. The first message was short, "You around?" I stared at it, feeling my chest tighten. I shouldn't go. I thought I shouldn't do this again. I answered anyway. "Yeah, just finished for the day." The reply came within seconds. "Come by if you want. I'm home." I told myself I was just going to talk to clear the air, to set some kind of boundary instead. I found myself driving back to her house. My pulse racing. The entire way that night became the first of many. We fell into an easy, dangerous rhythm. I never used the key again. I always rang the bell. Rebecca would open the door with that soft, knowing smile, and we'd pick up right where we left off. Sometimes it was simple. We'd sit in her kitchen drinking wine, talking for hours. We shared stories about our lives, the crazy clients. I dealt with the nightmare real estate deals she'd had to handle. I loved listening to her talk. She had this calm, graceful way of telling even the most frustrating story, like it was a funny memory. Other nights we would watch movies on her massive flat-screen TV. She introduced me to old black and white classics I'd never seen before. We'd order takeout from a dozen different places around town. She teased me relentlessly for my terrible chopstick skills the night we ate. Chinese Rebecca had a way of making me feel both completely at ease and completely on edge at the same time. There was no pressure, no expectations, but also no clarity about what we were. I try not to think about that too much. I opened up to her more than I had with anyone. Before I told her about how I'd struggled after high school, how I couldn't afford college, how starting my own handyman business had been my way of taking control. I admitted how hard it was sometimes to be the guy who always showed up to fix things for others but had no one to lean on himself. Rebecca listened quietly, her brown eyes never leaving mine. She never interrupted, never judged, just nodded thoughtfully as though she understood in a way no one else ever had. She shared small pieces of her life too. I moved here a couple of years ago, she said once sipping a glass of pen. Noir needed a change. I've dated a few men. Nothing serious. I stopped trying a while ago. I asked her once why she let me in, why she wanted me around. You don't expect anything from me, she said with a soft smile. You're not trying to impress me. You're just you. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just smiled back. Weeks passed. We kept our little secret going. Our private world nobody else knew about. I stopped going out for beers with my buddy Joel. I ignored the teasing text from my cousin Sam. I was careful not to let anything slip, but little cracks started to appear in the perfect illusion. Her house was spotless, too spotless. No family photos, no clutter, no signs of anyone else living there. One night, I caught sight of a heavy men's coat shoved to the back of her hall closet. Another time, I noticed a pair of dress shoes half hidden under the bed when I asked about them. She brushed it off. An ex-boyfriend left them here, she said casually. I just never got around to tossing them. I wanted to believe her I did, but that quiet voice inside me, the one I tried so hard to ignore, kept whispering, you don't really know her. One evening, we sat on the couch in her softly lit living room, the glow of candles flickering across the walls. I stared at her for a long moment and finally worked up the courage to speak. Rebecca, why don't you ever tell me more about yourself, about your life? She set down her glass and leaned back, pulling her knees up onto the cushion. For the first time, her smile wavered. I like what we have, Johnson, she said quietly. I don't want to complicate it. I could have pushed. I should have pushed. But I didn't. I was too afraid that asking too many questions would shatter whatever this fragile thing between us was. So I stayed. We kept going. The secrecy had been thrilling at first, but now it started to gnaw at me every time I left her house before sunrise, sneaking out through the quiet neighborhood. I felt a little heavier, a little more tangled in something I couldn't name. I realized one night lying awake in her bed while she slept beside me that I was falling for her, and that scared me more than anything else had in my life. The next morning I left before she woke up. I climbed in my truck and sat gripping the steering. While so tightly my knuckles turned white, I stared at the road ahead and whispered to myself, this isn't going to end well. But I couldn't walk away. Not yet. Something was coming. I could feel it. I just didn't know what or when. The morning after that sleepless night, I tried to shake it off. I'd bury myself in work again, hoping the routine would numb me. I installed a ceiling fan in a rental house, patched drywall in an old craftsman bungalow, fixed a busted faucet for a single mom on the outside. I was the same dependable Johnson, smiling, polite professional. But inside, I felt like I was walking a tightrope over something dark and inevitable. I kept seeing Rebecca. I kept ignoring the voice telling me to stop. We slipped back into our familiar rhythm, takeout dinners, long conversations, quiet evenings on the couch, falling asleep with her head on my chest. But the tension lingered under the surface like an unspoken question. Neither of us wanted to ask. I noticed small things that unsettled me more and more. A men's razor on the bathroom sink, 2 different brands of cologne on her dresser, an expensive men's watch left in a drawer. Every time I worked up the nerve to say something, I stopped myself. I didn't want to ruin what we had. I told myself I was overthinking it, that maybe there were leftovers from her past, like she'd said before, until the night everything came crashing down. It was a Tuesday. I had just finished up a long day repairing a deck for an older couple. I texted Rebecca like I always did. Almost done. Here, want me to come by? No reply. I waited watching the 3 dots pop up, disappear, pop up again. Finally, her message came. Johnson, don't come tonight. My husband is back in town. I froze, my stomach dropped. I read it again. My husband. The word hit me like a punch. I stared at the phone, unable to breathe my chest. Heightened, I hadn't misread it. She never once mentioned a husband, no pictures, no wedding ring, no signs. I sat in my truck for what felt like hours, my mind racing, anger, shock, betrayal, humiliation. All of it turned at once. I had fallen for her. I had crossed every line I swore I never would, and now I realized I had been nothing more than a secret, a dangerous, reckless escape from her real life. I wanted to call her, demand answers. I want to drive to her house, pound on the door, and ask how she could do this. But I didn't. Instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I blocked her number. I erased our message history. I deleted her contact from my phone. I drove straight home, walked into my small apartment, opened the drawer where the silver key still sat. I stared at it for a long time. The same key that had started all. Then I threw it into the trash. The next few days were the hardest. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I showed up at jobs and went through the motions, like a robot. My buddy Joel noticed something was off and asked if I was okay. I told him I was just tired inside. I was furious with her, with myself, with the whole stupid situation. But slowly the numbness gave way to clarity. I realized I had allowed myself to get swept into something I knew from the start wasn't right. I ignored every red flag because I wanted to believe in the fantasy. I wanted to feel chosen, needed, desired. That wasn't love. That was recklessness disguised as romance one night. Weeks later, I sat on the worn couch in my apartment and finally let out a long breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I wasn't angry anymore, just wiser. Rebecca had been a lesson, a painful one, but necessary. I promised myself something. Right then and there, I would never again let myself fall into something blind. I would ask the hard questions. I would respect boundaries, mine and theirs, and I would never take someone's silence as an answer. Life moved on. I kept working. Slowly the ache faded. The nights stopped feeling so heavy. I started meeting friends for drinks again, laughing at dumb stories, feeling human. I never heard from Rebecca again. I never saw her around town, and I never went near her street. I didn't want to. The chapter was closed. I was Johnson the handyman, again a little older, a little more cautious, but still standing.